Welcome back to the RebelLUG YouTube channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at this Mandalorian N-1 Starfighter modification that I did a couple of days ago, and I figured I'd go over a bunch of the techniques that I used to create this model, as well as crediting the original designer, which I will do right now. Insert, you can follow him wherever, but I basically just took a bunch of his building techniques for his N-1 Starfighter, and I converted it into this Mandalorian heavily modified version. So for convenience sake, and also on accident, I completely destroyed one of the engines here, and just you can get a sense of how I put things together. So we start off with this 3x3 cylinder piece, and then you take this 3-long rod with a gear on the outside of it, and then you have the turbine print held on by a 1x1 round with a hole in the center to hold it all together. And then you go ahead and put that on the axle hole inside of the 3x3, and you just get this nice little tan color peeking through in a very gray model overall. So it just adds a nice pop and is, I don't know if it's a super accurate detail, it's more of a dark tan on the inside, but the tan had to work here, and I thought it looked really nice just because you get the little rivets on the gear and it lines up with the turbine very nicely. Just overall, I think a very positive impression. Then you move on, and that would attach to the front here, by the way. Then we'll move on to another technique, which is using a minifigure bracket piece, you can see right there, to sort of round out studs. So you don't get the full stud exposure, which I think often looks super awkward. You just kind of get that little, like, tiny peak of a cylinder going through. And then I use some round tiles to kind of smooth things out and also allow for this whip piece. So I'll go ahead and grab a normal whip so you can see what that looks like. A whip piece here, and that just looks, you can see it doesn't even really resemble it too much. You just kind of get the wire peeking through. It's a very nice little piece of greebling effect that's used pretty commonly. And that's sort of tied up underneath here on a clip. Then we get over here, which is a binocular on a clip standing straight up. And I think that is just such a nice little greeble detail. Somebody else has probably done it before me, but it just looks fantastic, and I was really happy with the way it turned out. It just fills the space very nicely. I've used it in a couple builds that I've never posted, so yeah. Then moving to the back, I've used some 1x1s to kind of fill in the space. Insert doesn't do this on his model, but I think it adds just a nice little bit of detail to the engine thrusts, which are very iconic in the N1 aesthetic. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, except for this ventilation thing, which uses a 1x1 modified piece with the studs on the two sides at the front, and then some curved slopes to kind of make the engine intake go up into the main build. So I'll go ahead and put this all together right now so you can see the completed engine on the ship. So one thing I figured I'd show before I reattach the engine assembly to the N1 itself is the way this little front assembly with the ventilation bits attaches. So there's just some clips attached to tiles here. You can see another clip makes that transition go into another clip. Then we have this short axle piece held into some 1x1 studs, then into the clips again. And it just looks fantastic, and it slots in very nicely. So I'll go ahead and put it on. So just slotting that into place, you can see it fits really nicely underneath this curved tile at the front. And I just think it looks absolutely fantastic if you just go ahead and kind of pan out and you can see both the engines in effect. Again, the tan just shines through so nicely. Just wonderful. I'm absolutely so happy with it. And then the other engine has another technique, which is basically using a droid arm piece here to create a 3-long kind of transition between the two bars, so you get the prongs going into the engine to house the rest of this greebling. The only thing I'm really unhappy with on the whole build is actually just this one exposed stud. I wish I could have used the same technique with a minifigure bracket to kind of cover it up, but there's just not much room if I'm trying to incorporate the whip piece again right there. So you can see the whip is definitely a good way to go. And I figured I would also show the way this vent kind of works out at the bottom. So you can see, yeah, it just looks really nice going into the engine there. The next two techniques I wanted to show are actually on the side panel over here, and that is basically using a headlight piece with a couple of studs to have the length of a 2-stud area, and it just lines up exactly perfectly. Obviously you do get that little gap there, but the half stud offset allows for studs to be stacked on the side, and it fills the area extremely nicely. The next technique is actually using this lever piece to create a thin line. So when I zoom back, you can actually see that it's, you know, dark gray, light gray, dark gray, light gray, dark gray, and that's on a single dark gray piece with the lever that separates them. And I left the stud open because you can see the ball actually goes up just a little bit, and I didn't want to have it poking out too much. So what you do is you basically take one of these grill pieces, then you can take a lever piece, which you can see here, detach the stem from the lever piece, and then you just stick it in to the grill part, and it just looks so phenomenal. I also used it in the front section up here on this kind of exhaust port up front. I really don't know what to call it, but it's I don't know, it's an interesting feature for sure, and it looks great, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It didn't get too repetitive. So moving to the other side, you can see this inset technique that I used with an ingot piece, and that is done with just leaving a tile space above where the end of the bracket is going to go. That's how you get the inset with this bracket piece. Then I've just kind of made the enclosure so you can ignore that. Then put the tile on, and I would do this before because popping a tile into place is kind of annoying once you're locked it in. So put it on, then you can take the bottom, line it up using two hands because one is obviously not very effective, and you get that nice little inset, and it works out really nicely. And you can see on the back there you actually get the exposed bracket, so you probably want to leave this hidden and have the nice little inset showing out, and that's exactly what I did with the ingot piece. The ingot piece adds more detail than the tile, but I wanted to make the techniques from this build as useful as possible, and ingots kind of limit the usability of the technique. So for the last technique, I wanted to pivot towards the bottom, and I just wanted to show that you can actually use bar pieces to fill gaps in your builds. So I have some clips going out and they extend back here. And again, like this would be a massive gap if I just left it open. And it just looks so great once you fill it in with bars. It's not exactly right because I believe Inset uses tiles on his original version of this build, but again, I had to modify it to get the engine underneath and to get the greebling on top. So it's actually ends up being a pretty different build that retains the same shape. But yeah, the bars are just a great way to kind of cover it up and make it look halfway decent from the underside. Again, it's not as nice as Insert's, but it's definitely what I kind of had to do to get this extra engine fitting in the back. So that's really it for this little technique breakdown of everything I added to Insert's N-1 Starfighter. The Insert N-1, I believe you can get the instructions off BrickVault. They're not sponsoring this video or anything, but he definitely has the best N-1 in my opinion, so that's what I went ahead and used for. And I also have his N-1 built somewhere. But I wanted to make sure my modification matched it. Unfortunately, you can't fit the child figure, or Baby Yoda, Grogu, whatever you want to call him, in that little dome up there. But I guess you're just going to have to deal with it because it's the exact scale for an N1, and it's at least the closest I thought of. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next upload.